All right, so let's start live on the ground in Delaware where Nick Harper is live for us, and he's been following the Joe Biden camp. Nick, first question, is the Joe Biden contingency sort of getting ready to declare victory?
Well, they're certainly heading in that direction, Francis. They are incredibly bullish that Joe Biden is going to be the next president of the United States. His campaign manager, Jen O'Malley-Dillon, has been speaking to reporters within the last hour, and she said that it was now inevitable that Joe Biden would be the next president. She broke down the numbers, but essentially said that with that vote counting continuing in key states like Pennsylvania, Nevada, and Georgia, they feel that they will just simply continue to extend their lead or to narrow Donald Trump's gap in those states. They feel that they'll be able to win all of them and therefore reach that magic number of 270 rather comfortably. Essentially, like you said a moment ago, it seems to be Joe Biden's to lose, but they're not quite getting ready yet to declare victory. They are waiting for all of those votes to continue to be counted. That seems to be one of Joe Biden's central messages now, that all the votes must be counted. So we'll have to wait and see what all of the individual states say when they think that one person has won or the other, and then we'll have to wait to see when Joe Biden feels that he is ready to come out and claim victory.
So if he's waiting for vote counting, you mean to say that he won't declare victory until a few days has gone by?
Well, potentially. I mean, it really depends because, as you mentioned a moment ago, it depends which tally you look at. If you look at one particular tally that has already factored in that he's won Arizona, then he only needs Nevada, 6 electoral college votes to win. If you take Arizona out of the equation, then he would need a state with a larger number of electoral college votes, for example Pennsylvania with 20. So it may be a case that he will wait for a couple of those states so that he has an extra large number to take him well and beyond that 270 threshold. It is unclear exactly what his strategy will be, but I think it'll definitely involve having the majority, if not all, of the US networks and news agencies declaring that he has won enough votes to take him past 270.
Nick, looking at the markets today, a final question for you. It's really interesting because the markets are up, mainly sort of on the congressional battle, which doesn't look as clear for the Democrats. It looks like Congress will still be divided. The markets like Donald Trump's tax cuts, so this looks like Joe Biden may not be able to push through his tax reforms. That's really interesting, but does it make his life difficult if he gains the White House, but the Democrats, again, kind of hamstrung by a divided Congress?
Yeah, they certainly will be. I mean, if we have that division with the House for the Democrats and the Senate for the Republicans, no matter who is in the White House, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican, will have difficulty pushing things through. Now, Joe Biden has said that if he's elected, he would tax people who own over $400,000 a year. That has worried the super wealthy here in the United States, in particular, you might say, the bankers and the traders, and therefore perhaps Wall Street is looking at this, feeling some confidence that he just won't be able to push that through, even if he's in the White House, because we'll have a divided Congress. And remember as well that world markets like stability. They don't like the unpredictable element thrown in, and it would be a continuation if we have a divided Congress. It would make it very hard for Joe Biden, if he's elected, to get much done, but from a market point of view, that stability remains.
All right, Nick Harper in Delaware, thank you very much. We'll let you go, and let's go live to Sherwin Bryce Peace in New York. Sherwin, earlier you were painting out the various scenarios for us. Nevada features, maybe that could happen sooner rather than later. Just tell us, what are the options here?
Before I get to that, let me just give you some of the breaking news we're getting. You know, President Trump hasn't been seen in front of a camera talking since these numbers have been coming through, but he has been tweeting, Francis. The president has had Twitter flag, I beg your pardon, 8 of his last 20 two tweets, right? When they flag them, it means it's a misrepresentation. The president has tweeted things like, stop the count. Now, remember, he's trailing Biden in Arizona and Nevada. If you stop the count, you will then lose those states. So it kind of doesn't make sense for him to stop the count. He's also tweeted, stop the fraud. This has been flagged by Twitter. And he's also stated this: all of the recent Biden claimed states will be legally challenged by us for voter fraud and state election fraud. Plenty of proof. Just check out media. We will win America first. I can tell you we're getting some news out of Georgia at this moment, where a judge there has thrown out a Trump lawsuit seeking to halt the ballot count in Georgia. They had alleged that ballots arrived after the 8 p.m. deadline, which is the deadline in Georgia for ballots to be counted, and then were added to ballots that arrived before the 8 p.m. deadline. The judge throwing that out. And of course, now to paint you a picture, it's very, very close in Georgia. The president has a 13,000 vote lead in Georgia. So that lead has narrowed over the last 24 hours. He has about a 75,000 lead in North Carolina. Pennsylvania still has 600,000 ballots outstanding, and the president's lead there is 115,000, Francis. And what that means, given the trajectory we've seen in the incoming absentee and mail-in ballots, it's an advantage for Biden, because a lot of more Democrats have voted for the president. I think I've lost my connection here. Nevada, of course, very, very close. The president has a lead. Vice President Biden has a lead there of about 12,000 votes. They're expecting that to narrow as more votes come in. And of course, Arizona, the big one that has been called by the Associated Press and Fox News. Of course, the other networks have not called it. The Biden campaign indicating that they're still confident they will win Arizona, but they expect the race to tighten in the hours ahead. But of course, still very confident that they will win this, Francis.
All right, and let's look at the implications coming back home. Sophie, I guess there's a growing interest here in South Africa at who this man is, Joe Biden. He's been here before, but at that time we didn't see him as a future presidential candidate. Is that what's happening, sort of growing interest in this specific candidate?
Well, let me start an activist and also fighting for the rights of the oppressed in South Africa. Joe Biden at some point in time was very, very vocal in fighting for the rights of the oppressed, and he didn't shy away from taking head-on the administration, then pushing the administration to support sanctions against the apartheid regime, but also indicating that there's no way the world can stand by idling when people are oppressed in South Africa. Let us listen to what he had to say in the Senate at some point in time in 1986.
What disturbs me more than the policy that you call a policy is the rationale for the policy. The rationale for the policy. You set out 4 principles that you adhere to, and then and I will go over them in a moment. Then you say on page 14, we must not become part of South Africa's problem. We must remain part of their solution. We must not aim to impose ourselves, our solutions, our favorites in South Africa. Damn it, we have favorites in South Africa. The favorites in South Africa are the people who are being repressed by that ugly white regime. We have favorites. Our loyalty is not to South Africa, it's to South Africans. And the South Africans are majority black, and they are being excoriated. It is not to some stupid puppet government over there. It is not to the Afrikaners regime. We have no loyalty to them. We have no loyalty to South Africa, to South Africans. And the fact of the matter is I listen to this rationale first of all. It is the leaders of South Africa and their people, black and white, who have the majority responsibility. They must rise to it. Well, they are rising to it. They're rising to it. The only thing left available with that repulsive, repugnant regime of Afrikaners there. And it's the only way they have. They've tried everything for the last 20 years. They begged, they borrowed, they crawled, and now they're taking up arms. The second thing, progress toward peace requires a timetable. Timetable, elimination of apartheid. What's our timetable? What are we saying to that repugnant regime? These people are being crushed. And we're sitting here with the same kind of rhetoric. The same thing we heard.
Senator, let me say that I hate to hear a senator of the United States calling for violence
I'm not calling
That's
for violence.
what you're doing.
I hate
That is
to hear.
exactly what you're doing.
I hate to hear an administration and a Secretary of State refusing to act on a morally abhorrent point. I hate to hear this country. I'm ashamed that this country puts out a policy like this that says nothing. Nothing. It says continue the same. We put no timetable on. We make no specific demand. We don't set it down. I'm ashamed that's our policy. That's what I'm ashamed of. I'm ashamed of the lack of moral backbone to this policy.
That's Joe Biden then. And I know that in 2010 he visited South Africa. He met the former Deputy President Kgalema Motlanthe. During the meeting, he spoke about his visit to South Africa in 1977. Therefore, he's no stranger to South Africa. And on the same, during the same time when he was in South Africa, he also took time. Perhaps we can pull that picture to show you, and also the visuals of the Deputy President then, Kgalema Motlanthe. He visited the former president of South Africa, Thabo Mbeki. I think there the interaction revolved around issues on the continent, particularly in North Africa, the Libya question. I think the discussions then revolved around such issues, because you know that Mbeki is regarded as one of the elders of the continent. And I think Sherwin can also share some thoughts in terms of who Joe Biden is pre-1994.
Yeah, let me just provide a little bit more context about that fiery speech from Joe Biden in the Senate hearing. He was there in conversation with then President Ronald Reagan, Secretary of State. And the context here, Sophie and Francis, is that in July of 1986, Ronald Reagan made a speech where he soft-pedaled South Africa's racist oppression and insisted on this policy of constructive engagement with the then apartheid government. And that is the context for which that hearing was then held in the Senate a day later, and the interaction then with the former Secretary of State. And it was within a month of that hearing that Congress then started negotiating what was then to be called the Comprehensive Anti-Apartheid Act, which passed in October of 86. So that just shows you the kind of quick trajectory and how much weight that speech in the United States Senate had on influencing congressional negotiations that eventually imposed sanctions in South Africa that to this day is regarded as one of the seminal administrative legacies of the U.S. administration in terms of dismantling apartheid, in terms of contributing to international sanctions against the apartheid regime. So that's just a little bit about Joe Biden. Sophie also talked about his visit to South Africa. He accompanied then Congressman Andrew Young in the 1970s. Earlier this year, his campaign, or he had misstated that he was arrested in South Africa. The campaign then walked that back to say that when they arrived at with the delegation, which was a multiracial delegation, he was told to go through the white entrance, and the other parts of that black, the black members of that delegation were told to go in another door, and he was separated from his delegation, but he certainly wasn't arrested, so they walked that back. But there was some controversy in the early days of his campaign for president. So a little bit more about Joe Biden, but remember, he's not president yet.
Race is still open, let's be clear, but he is in the lead. So, Sophie, if you are President Cyril Ramaphosa tonight, are you happy with that fact that he is the lead candidate right now?
Well, I think as a head of state, President Ramaphosa is monitoring the situation in the United States of America. Of course, in terms of diplomacy, you don't just shout and indicate your interest or your preferences, because you don't know what's likely to happen, and therefore you keep both of them in your watch, but you interact with both of them if necessary. Secondly, he is currently, I think, engaging with the ambassador in the United States of America, in Washington in particular, to say, give me more information, what's happening, where is this thing going? And he would do the same with the ambassador at the UN, Ambassador Majila, to say, what are you sensing on the ground? But he is not gonna really show up now and indicate what he wants or his preferences, but he would continuously talk about we will work with whoever is being elected and who is the choice of the Americans. But the other story, Francis, for me is that we have kind of forgotten that there are also VPs, the candidates there. You know, Mike Pence, if Donald Trump retain his position, Mike Pence is coming back. On the other hand, you have Joe Biden. If Joe Biden is able to clinch this one, a history is going to be made, and we are going to see a woman ascending to a very, very powerful position or office in the land. And I have no doubt that as we speak, the director of UN Women, Dr. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, the former South African deputy president, she's got now 2 statements at her desk. The one, congratulations, the one lamenting the fact that, again, a woman was not supported because he is part of the ticket of Joe Biden.
Yeah, symbolic not only for women, but for black women, for Indian women as well. Sherwin, is it too early to start talking about Kamala Harris? And I think we do have to say that there have been some concerns about Joe Biden's age. That is there. You look at that fiery speech, and it's a different way of speaking, opening up him up to being called Sleepy Joe by the U.S. president. I mean, Kamala could be important.
She is very, very important. She was a very strategic choice in terms of Joe Biden nodding his hat, if you will, to women black support in the United States, particularly for the Democratic Party. Remember, Francis, it was the black vote that turned around Joe Biden's primary campaign. He was losing to to Bernie Sanders. He was losing to Elizabeth Warren. He was losing to Pete Buttigieg. And it was the black vote in the Carolinas, South Carolina, North Carolina, that turned his campaign around. So strategic thank you was why I think in many ways he chose Kamala Harris. But you are right. Remember, she was his competitor in that race. So the narrative certainly from the Trump campaign is watch out. You know, Joe Biden's not going to last through his first term. Look how old he is. Kamala Harris will be standing ready to take over in the wings. But that is not necessarily the case. This is Joe Biden's Democratic Party. This is Joe Biden's presidential campaign. He is the top of the ticket, and it's his policy positions and persuasions that are going to be implemented in this administration. But you are quite correct. He will be the oldest person, if successful in the days ahead, to be elected president of the United States. But let's not forget, despite what's used to color his temperature, the president of the United States is also in his 70s, so it's not such a big age difference between the two of them, Francis.
The golden oldies. Let's go now live to Kate Fischer. She's in Washington for us, following the Trump campaign. The mood, Kate, amongst members of the Trump campaign tonight?
Well, I think it's a lot less enthusiastic and optimistic than it was when we began to see results trickling in, which may feel quite a long time ago now, but was actually only Tuesday evening here in the US. Then Donald Trump was very confident. He seemed buoyed by these early flashes of leads that he was taking in a lot of states that were important to him, particularly Florida. There had been a lot of investment there by Democrats, yet he came out victorious. But then, as the days have gone on and all these hundreds of millions of votes have been counted, some of those leads in some of those crucial states have been shrinking for the president, and it is not making him happy. He spoke just before polls closed on Tuesday, the last time he spoke, actually the penultimate time he spoke this week, saying that for him, winning was easy, but losing was never easy. And I think you're seeing the results of this now. He has taken to Twitter to say that there's been fraudulent voting, that they need to stop counting the votes in areas where he is not winning. A lot of these tweets have been labelled by Twitter as being misleading and suggesting that they're not factually correct, yet he's continuing to give this impression that he believes that the election is being stolen from him, even deploying members of his family to places like Pennsylvania, one of the key states that he's currently trying to win, to suggest, to give press conferences to suggest that things are not being done fairly.
Do we know what any other prominent Republicans think of his claims of fraud?
Well, that's a really good question, because all these claims are coming out even in the early hours of the morning, of the early hours of Wednesday morning, so just after the polls closed. He came out in the White House and actually declared victory and began these allegations of voter fraud and accusing the Democrats of trying to steal the election. And there was pretty much silence from the Republicans. There were not lots of Republican senators coming out and saying, yes, listen to the president, he's right, the election's been stolen and that we're actually winning. It was silent. His vice president, Mike Pence, did not say that. Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader in the Senate, did not come out and say he agreed with the president. They haven't come out and disagreed with him, but they certainly haven't supported him in his allegations of this.
Sherwin, let me bring you in here. Looking at that map behind you, I understand that if Biden does get to 270, then basically most, or if not all, of Donald Trump's legal challenges would have to be successful in all these different states for him to overturn that. Would it be that difficult for him?
It would be very hard. I mean, I think what happened earlier today in Georgia, where essentially were the Trump allegations of, adding ballots that should not be part of the equation, throwing that out immediately. We expect that something similar will happen in the other states. Why? Because we've heard from the people running those elections and the bipartisan nature of how those elections are being managed. Remember, we talk about how these ballots are being processed by both parties, with party representatives, poll watchers who are in there, the media is in there. So we have to see the evidence, Francis. What is the evidence that the Trump campaign is going to present here? You cannot just say that based on electoral law in a place like Philadelphia that has been affirmed by the Supreme Court in that state, allowing ballots to be counted 3 days after Election Day. Those are the rules by which voters have, submitted their ballots. In the state of Nevada, for example, which is still outstanding, ballots will be counted received as far as November 10th. In terms of state law, and that has already been challenged by the Trump administration, unsuccessfully so, in the courts in Nevada. The suspicion is that if you fail in the lower courts, there will be an appeal to drag the situation out. And of course, the president does enjoy a 6-3 conservative majority in the Supreme Court of the United States, but that also doesn't tell us how the justices there will rule. Remember, they would be ruling here on something that is very, very fundamental to the view of American democracy, not only in this country, but around the world. So if you're going to start undermining, the processes in terms of an election after the point, throwing out ballots after the point, I think that's going to create some sort of, unknown tension, given just how tense and anxious people are here already. You asked a question of my colleague in Washington earlier about if Republicans have been critical of the president. I'll tell you who's been critical of the president is an observer mission that's been on the ground here in the United States, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. That's a branch of the European Union, and this is what they said about the president's comments, Francis. President Trump has tarnished this election with claims of fraud, allegations that have undermined the trust in this democracy. Tuesday's vote was both competitive and well managed. So if that's not definitive, it's unclear, the sort of aspersions and the allegations that will now emanate from the Trump campaign.
Well, Kate in Washington, back to you. Do you believe that the Trump campaign believes it could really win this election through the courts if Biden keeps his lead, gets to 270, and those legal challenges go ahead? If they don't really believe that, if it's such a long shot, then there could be ulterior motives to claims of fraud, not only fraud but of people stealing the votes.
I think that Donald Trump believes he should be winning. It's hard. I asked somebody a question the other day. Do you think he does actually believe that fraud is being committed, or is it kind of a conspiracy? And it's hard to know. He's so sure that he is the best person to be president, and he is so sure that the American people love him, that I think he really struggles to understand that he may not be winning in some of these states, especially in these states that he won back in 2016. So things like getting a recount in Wisconsin and filing lawsuits in Michigan. He doesn't understand, I think, why he's lost them this time around, because he won them in 2016 and he will not let them go. And the next best thing that he can do, if he can't get any more people to vote for him, the next thing he can do is try to go through the courts to try to overturn things, or at least to slow the process down and give him a bit of time to regain the momentum. He likes to have momentum. He likes to have things on his side, and I think that's another reason he's decided to do this. Also, he's a very litigious man. He likes to sue people. He likes to take his opponents to court. This is the way he's done business, and this, it appears, is the way he's going to conduct his politics when it comes to this election as well. It's very normal to him to throw his lawyers at a problem. But a lot of people, a lot of legal experts seem to think that there are very few of these cases that actually have much chance of going anywhere, partly because the votes are there and there is no evidence of this tampering or this fraudulent behaviour or this ballot dumping that he's been talking about.
Yeah, back to Sherwin, like you said earlier, there have been electoral observers from both parties, from several organizations. Moving the legal challenges aside, Sherwin and Nick Harper said earlier that Joe Biden will probably be pretty cautious before he comes out and declares victory. But in terms of the big networks in the United States, just venture a guess. How soon could we know? How soon could one of those candidates, sort of in the clear projections, pass the 270 mark?
Well, this will be instructive. You know, the state of Arizona, we've been given an indication by the Biden campaign, and Nick might have mentioned this earlier, but I couldn't hear him. That the Arizona count will only be affirmed finally by probably tomorrow. So the impression that we're getting is that we will not have an announcement today. That actually is what the Biden campaign has said. They do not expect a president to be named, or a president-elect certainly to be named today, by the earliest tomorrow. But it's also unclear what these legal cases now in various states will mean for this trajectory. I suspect that in terms of what comes in now from the states, the networks will call it anyway, despite some of the challenges in places, for example, like Michigan and Wisconsin, that have already been declared in Joe Biden's favor. Look, if we get a result from Nevada later today, and given that the AP and Fox News have already called that, we will then start getting an indication about how close we're getting here. But I imagine that through an abundance of caution, the Biden campaign won't want to jump the gun as President Trump did on Tuesday night, of course, the early hours of Tuesday night at the White House, declaring victory in this election. Yeah, I think the Biden campaign is seeking to really have a credible outcome here and wouldn't want to come out too early and then have things reversed down the line, Francis.
All right, and the rest of us will have to wait and be patient. Sophie, that footage that we played of Joe Biden, that fiery speech, I think it was just incredible. But give us more insight. Earlier in the week, you were saying it's not necessarily the case that when a Democratic candidate prevails, suddenly things are sweet and rosy for Africa, maybe in terms of the relationship, but not always in terms of the tangible sort of help or tangible kind of effects on the ground.
Yes, of course, when you have a president from the Democrats, it gets better. But the reality is America is America. I mean, some of these policies and approach to issues are there and are institutionalized. And therefore, it doesn't automatically translate to what you would expect. For example, on issues of Middle East, it will still be that heated exchange and engagement in terms of what needs to happen in the Middle East. South Africa supports Palestine, they support two-state solution, and I think whether it's Biden or it is President Donald Trump, they will always tread carefully on the Middle East question. You go to countries such as China, whether it is Joe Biden or Donald Trump, the contestation, the subtle trade war or the huge trade war will always be there on, countries such as Russia, and therefore South Africa, being an ally to these countries, will also take a position of supporting the allies, but also ensuring that that doesn't translate in damaging the relations with the United States of America, because whether you like it or not, I mean, it is the largest economy, and therefore it doesn't really automatically becomes a very smooth sailing trip. You'll always have that. I mean, it was during Barack Obama where Libya was attacked. It was during Bush where Iraq was attacked. Therefore, because it's based on certain principles and values and friendship and alliances. I mean, NATO, where NATO goes, America wants to follow. Even though Donald Trump has kind of caused tension within the NATO family. And also the G7, it's the same thing. And South Africa is always taking a position of the least developed and also the developing nations, and preferences is South-South. So I think you will get that, but the language becomes much better, and consensus reigns supreme. And at the multilateral level as well, it's easy to engage with the Democrats. I mean, Donald Trump was just very difficult.
Yeah. All right, Kate, I think you're going to have... Sure, you can come in.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about, Sophie hit the nail on the head there at the end about how in the multilateral fora, there's definitely a different posture between a Republican administration and a Democratic administration. If you take the pandemic in the United States and the mishandling of the pandemic and you compare that to the international outlook of the Obama administration in terms of Ebola, particularly in West Africa, and the multilateral effort that was in part led by the United States in arresting what was a devastating impact in the West African region, and also on the Middle East question. You know, one of the last Security Council votes in December of 2016, before Obama left office, the Security Council passed a resolution condemning settlements, the illegal settlements in the West Bank, and for the first time in a very long time, on a vote that involved the state of Israel, the American administration abstained on that vote, basically, allowing that resolution to pass. Remember, they had a veto; they could have vetoed that decision. So we have international law based on that Security Council resolution that condemns the proliferation and the expansion of settlements on Palestinian territory. And there are other examples of the Obama administration vis-a-vis Cuba, for example, right? They also abstained in the General Assembly during that annual vote that happens in October at the General Assembly, calling for the economic blockade to be lifted. And of course, we've seen a reversal from the Trump administration in terms of the era of détente that the Democratic administration of Barack Obama and Joe Biden sought to establish with Cuba. So there are some differences. Broadly speaking, Sophie is absolutely right, but I think we can point out some nuances that are quite different between the two.
Yeah, it's fascinating. International relations affected around the world by this election. Last word, we're running out of time. That'll be for you, Kate. Some people get nervous when Donald Trump doesn't tweet or talk for a while. We don't know what's going to happen next. What is he expected to say? When is he expected to come out?
Yeah, it's very unusual, isn't it, that we have had such a wall of silence from the White House ever since he spoke in the early hours of the morning, just after those election results had started to come in, where he essentially declared victory and made these strong allegations about fraud and stealing of the election. Since that point, he has not been in front of a television camera, and we think that it is probably because his advisors have said it's best not to do it, because they don't want him to repeat that performance, which shocked not just so many Americans, but people across the world that the President of the United States could allege such things and declare himself the winner of an election before the votes had been counted. They don't want a repeat of that, so they've managed to keep him away from television cameras until now, at least. He is tweeting pretty regularly, but as I said, Twitter is being very careful about labeling any of his tweets that they deem to be maybe incorrect or allegations rather than truths, to make sure that they are labeled as such so that people looking at Twitter have that knowledge about it. So when will he speak? We are all waiting to find out. In the last day or so, it's only been members of his family who have been in front of a microphone. They've continued to say that he is in the lead, he is winning, and that the Democrats are stealing this election. We are yet to hear from the president himself. I imagine he will not be able to keep silent for too much longer.
All right, thank you very much. And we continue to follow this US election blow by blow here on SABC News. Thank you to the panelists, Kate Fischer, live for us from Washington, Sherwin Bryce Peace, live for us from New York, and Sophie Mokoena, foreign editor, live for us in Auckland Park in Johannesburg.